to have you here and with me to celebrate International Education Week and to welcome Aziz Abu Sarah as our headline speaker. Aziz hails from Palestine, from Jerusalem, and now from South Carolina. And he's that unusual person who aims to accomplish the really most difficult of tasks, which is getting us to talk to one another and learn from one another. And he's a remarkable practical approach to accomplish that goal. And he has no small ambitions for us as he approaches that goal. We should know no boundaries in the world. Now, I don't want to preempt anything Aziz might say as he tells his own story today, so I'm simply going to note that he's an internationally recognized peace builder through this work. He's been named a National Geographic Explorer for his work as a cultural educator. I could give you a long list. Instead, I'm going to let him talk. But I also want you to know that he and his tour company, Menschti Tours, work and serve all over the world in cross-cultural engagement. He aims to educate the world through that sometimes suspect pursuit, tourism. And tourism has its roots in pilgrimage. In the 18th century, you could go on the Grand Tour if you had lots of money. If you were very sick, you might stagger from spa to spa in the transportation of the time and probably not do too well when you got there. Rates of recovery were very slow once you got on the road with whatever your ailment was. But perhaps that's why in the 19th century, with new modes of transportation, tourism took off, leisure travel for lots of people. But the tension between pilgrims, those who search, and tourists who we sometimes think skate over the surface of the world, and travelers, those who manage to pass through and yet somehow dwell in a local culture, that tension is with us today as we think how to engage in a world that seems ever more challenging, and it's a real challenge for us as students and learners seeking to understand and contribute to the world. I want to thank our sponsors for this event, without which, we might not, who appropriately come from the whole range of the university. So global engagement, global studies, colleagues and international students and scholars and education abroad, we've all worked intensely to produce this week, so thank you everybody. The Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research, the English Department, and the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation, Tourism, and Hospitality Program all have partnered with us to bring this event today. And of course, we have partners in the School of Politics, Public Affairs, and International Studies, and guests from the community in Wyoming Humanities that speak to what a nice place Wyoming is whenever it's not actually snowing on your head. So, together, we want to give a warm welcome to Aziz Abu Sarah.
And you say I got 2 hours, right? This is the most used joke by speakers, and still people laugh at it, which is awesome. These I like to move a lot, and I'll need to keep playing with this keyboard to keep the slides going, so just a bit of rearrangement. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hope you're doing well. As Caroline said, my name is Aziz. I come from Jerusalem, which is where I grew up, and I've been living in the US on and off, kind of half-time in the last 15 years between Washington, D.C. and Jerusalem, and then now South Carolina and Jerusalem, all the centers of the world, especially the South Carolina one. What I want to do is tell you a little bit about my life, a little bit about my work, how I ended up moving into peace building, and then into tourism. I'll tell you a bit about my concept of crossing boundaries and how narratives and travel, conflict resolution and travel come together. And depending on how things go, I have way more slides than I have time, so I can move depending on how I feel which stories I want to tell you. I like to stay kind of spontaneous in what comes up in our discussion. Another thing, I'll probably ask you some questions, and many times it's not rhetorical, so I do want you to answer, and so we can have a conversation as this is going. Sounds good?
Yeah.
Well, I'll start with something Caroline mentioned in the beginning, being a National Geographic explorer. Anybody knows what does, well, let me start with this. When you think of the word explorer, what do you think of?
Dora and Explorer.
Dora the Explorer, that is right. That's also what I think of. What else? Anybody else?
Adventure.
Open mind.
Open mind, yeah. Somebody's like, wants to find new things. What else?
Adventurer.
What the Microsoft Explorer? That's a very new answer. I have never gotten that before. We're gonna have fun tonight. Okay, what else? What kind of image? You say Dora, who else is an explorer?
Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones, right. That's why I have this photo. It looks like an Indiana Jones, and that's always what I thought of an explorer. And so one day, I get an email, and it says, the title goes, congratulations, you've been named as an explorer. And I opened it, and it says, hi, this is National Geographic. We like your work. We've decided to name you as an explorer. We have a check that's going to come to you. Send us your bank account information. Right, so I did what many of you think I did, which is delete. This must be a spam email. I'm not sending my money to whoever is. You give them your bank account information, that's it. So a few days pass, and I get another email. And he goes, have you received our email about being an explorer? I'm like, yeah, right. These guys are really good at their marketing. No, delete that email again. And this goes on for like a couple of weeks, and then I get a phone call. And it says, hello, this is so-and-so from National Geographic. We named you as an explorer. Have you been receiving our emails? I'm like, oh, are you serious? And part of the reason is because I thought of explorers as, Indiana Jones. And I was doing educational work at that time, starting to do my travel work, and I didn't think of myself as explorer. But like you said earlier, explorer is somebody who seeks to do something new, opens their minds, going into the frontiers. What is it that we don't know? What is it that we can learn? That's really what exploration is all about. And so I called Scott, who's my business partner now, we were working in the university together, and I told him, and he goes, why did they call you to be an explorer? So I realized I needed more friends at this point. And then he goes, oh, I know why. Maybe we were working at the university at the time. He said, maybe they want you to explore that old sandwich in the faculty lounge. Because that sounds like archaeology. So, yeah, maybe. Anyway, I want to start by talking about travel not being about distance, but the state of mind. And I want to start with my own story. As I said, I do a lot of peace work now, but growing up, that was not where I came from. I came from a big family. I'm the youngest of 7 boys. That's me when I was a little kid. I looked really cute back then. Things have gone downhill at a point. This is in just outside the outskirts of Jerusalem. I'm the youngest of 7. I'm what you call the oops child. Or that's what I thought for a long time. Until recently, my mom arguing with me about, you need to make babies, and I'm telling her no. And then I said, but you didn't even plan on having me, so it's okay me not having kids. And she goes, oh no, you were planned. Now my dad is sitting there, and he goes, he was? And she explains, and yeah, so she planned it, he didn't. And it made sense, because oops child for a conservative Muslim family really doesn't make much sense, because if wine is not involved, it doesn't make sense. Being the youngest, I'm 9 years younger than my older next brother, and that's the 2 of us, Taysir, and that's really where my life was shaped a lot when I was a kid by Taysir. He was the person older than me, he's the person who took me to school, he's the person who argued with my teachers when I did something wrong. If I got into trouble, I would go to him. He's the one who would come and talk to whoever or fight with whoever, because he was also a teenager. It's perfect. He always was on my side. Teachers were wrong, other kids were wrong, I was always right, so it's perfect. So my life turned upside down when I was 9 years old, and Taysir was arrested by Israeli soldiers from our home. And he was accused of throwing rocks at soldiers. He was beaten up in prison, so he would confess to the charges. and he was sentenced for about a year in prison. Less than a year later, he was released. We took him home. He was very ill already and took him to a hospital in Jerusalem, and a few days after surgery, he ended up dying as a result of his injuries. I was at the time 10 years old. Taysir was 19 when he died. And I want you imagining being in the shoes of a 10-year-old seeing his brother being killed. How would you feel? What kind of emotions would you have?
Anger.
Anger. Grief. Right? Disbelief. I remember that. Until the burial, I was thinking, no, it can't be real. Bitterness, revenge, and it's kind of the normal thing for a 10-year-old to feel. It almost felt like if I just walk to you here, and I go, bam, 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 and I punch you, what would be your first reaction? Be honest.
Retaliate.
Right, retaliate, you'll punch back. How many of you, if somebody punches you in the face, your first response is, wait a second, let me take a moment to think about this logically. You know what, I'll take a few steps backward and think. How many of us would do that? Yeah, one, maybe. Do we want to test that? Most of us wouldn't do that. Most of us would retaliate. Most of us will punch back, if we're honest. And that's exactly how you feel when somebody kills your brother. You feel angry, you feel you're going to punch back. And so I grew up very angry, wanting to punch back, became very active politically. And that continued until I was 18 years old. And I felt I had no choice except for revenge, until I realized at 18 that I needed to study Hebrew. It was mandatory in my high school to study Hebrew. I managed to go 3 years not learning. I still passed all my exams, and since we are in a university, I'm not going to tell you how. But I realized I needed to study Hebrew, and the best place to study Hebrew is Ulpan, which is where Jewish immigrants go to study Hebrew. I was the only Palestinian going there. It was 20 minutes away from my house, walking distance. And yet I had never been really, that part of town is not the part of town I was comfortable being at. And I remember going to that classroom, and it felt like traveling across the globe. That's why I say travel is not about distance, it's about the state of mind. It felt I was in a totally new place, totally different place. I thought everybody hated me. I thought no one wanted me to be there. I remember sitting in the classroom like this and thinking, they're probably wondering what's this Arab sitting here doing. And I was amazed because my teacher walked to me and welcomed me in Arabic, my Israeli Jewish teacher. And I was shocked because it was the first time I felt an Israeli talking to me like a human being. And that's the moment where things started changing for me. In some ways, I realized that at 18 years old, I lived in Jerusalem, but I was in a place, Jerusalem isn't divided even by walls like this. You can cross, and yet we were divided by walls. But not just physical walls, we're divided by walls of ignorance, walls of fear, and walls of hatred. And those are much more concrete than this wall. They have much more impact on us than this wall. And in that classroom, even though I was sitting there, those walls were still between us. And it took that teacher, it took the students I was meeting, a little bit to start talking to each other. And my teacher was really an amazing teacher because she realized it's not about teaching a language, it's about teaching a culture. It's about teaching us to communicate. And not just learn about one culture, but learn about each other's culture. So she pushed us to really get to know each other. And within a few weeks, we became very close friends. And suddenly, those walls started falling apart. And we could see it eventually in simple things, like going out and having a drink together, or having coffee together, or eventually when something bad would happen in their area, it wasn't anymore the other, it wasn't them. It was my friend. And when something happened in my neighborhood, It wasn't for them the other, it was their friend. And that started bringing those stereotypes. But also what happened is that I realized that when I was 10 years old, I felt I had no choice. But in reality, we all have a choice. You can't control what other people do to you, but you can control how you respond. And that was such a freeing thing for me. Feeling that for the last 8 years, I was being a prisoner to the person who killed my brother. Every time I hated, every time I was angry, I was making that person's choice. I wasn't making my own choice. And choosing to go in a different path was such a redeeming thing. Not that that person deserved it, but it was the right choice for me. In one of his last interviews, Stephen Hawking said, the human failing I would most like to correct is aggression. He was asked, what is the greatest threat to humanity? And his response is aggression, conflict, people fighting with each other, people angry with each other, that you can't solve most of the other issues we are trying to deal with if we don't solve our relationship with each other. Martin Luther King Jr. said, men often hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they cannot communicate. They cannot communicate because they are separated. This is one of my favorite quotes because it really explains how conflicts, wars, dehumanization of the other happen. We fear each other because we cannot communicate, because we don't know. Even worse, I would say, sometimes because we think we know who the other is, but we never talk to them to really understand that. And I've worked in over 60, 65 countries around the world. Many of them I worked in conflict resolution aspects. And this seemed to be true in every place I've traveled and worked in. People have strong opinions about the other. They're afraid of the other. But in reality, they know nothing about who that other is. And so as I've worked in different conflict resolution works, I've worked in Afghanistan, I worked in Syria, I worked in Colombia, I worked in all these different places in the US, I kept thinking, how can I make my work more sustainable? How can I take this work of conflict resolution, getting people to know each other, which I started doing at first in Jerusalem and then all these places, how can I make it more and more sustainable? Then I met this guy, his name is Scott Cooper, he's an American Jewish guy, who was trying to do the same thing. And I met him in DC in 2008. We started working at George Mason University together and doing some conflict resolution work, and we kept searching for this question of sustainability. And we ended up coming with the idea of working in travel. And the reason we wanted to do that is we felt at that time, there were over 1 billion people who traveled internationally every year. 1 billion. By 2019, that number was 1.5 billion. It's a huge number. And we thought, wait a second, if we can connect people in conflict zones like Afghanistan, like Syria, we probably can connect people who travel together. I mean, that's probably a bit easier. And maybe we can bring down this whole concept of us, whichever way you define us, and them, whichever way you define them. Even us as travelers, them as the people wherever we travel. And so we established a company called Majdi Tours, which means honor, respect, glory, to break down that concept. And the first idea we had was in Jerusalem, in Israel and Palestine, which is instead of having one tour guide, let's have two. One Israeli and one Palestinian. And I remember telling that to people in the beginning, this is what we're planning to do. And I got some students to come and help us for free, to business students graduating from Yale Business School. And I asked them what they think, and they did this whole study for us, and they said, this is the dumbest idea you can have. Great, so let's do it. So we decided to do it, put an Israeli and a Palestinian guide and have them lead the tour at the same time. And the assumption was they're gonna fight, they're gonna argue with each other, they're gonna, it's gonna be uncomfortable for the travelers, and maybe one of them will walk away halfway through the tour. It's gonna be really, just so much madness putting them together. And the opposite happened. Not only did they get along, but at least these two I can tell you, Hussam Gibran and Yuval Ben Amin, not only did they get along, when Yuval 5 years later decided to get married to a Jewish woman, he's Israeli Jew, she's Israeli Jew, Hussam officiated their wedding. Stuff that doesn't normally happen. Even in some of the peace circles, it doesn't normally happen. It's crazy to have a Palestinian putting on a yarmulke and officiating a Jewish wedding. But that's the relationships that were created through putting two people working together. As for the travelers, you're standing here in Jaffa in this photo, and travelers are hearing about Jaffa's history, biblical era, Greek mythology, all that, and then going into the recent history, 1948. What happened in 1948? And the Palestinian tells how Palestinians we view what happened in 1948, and the Israelis said what Israelis view what happened in 1948. And then a discussion, not an angry discussion, but a debate kind of happened. And the travelers were part of that conversation. So tell us more about this, tell us more about that. Start talking about art, about poetry, about places like Gaza, which took most of the refugees from Jaffa, because they ended up leaving by boat and going to the closest area, which was Gaza, and many of the refugees of the population now in Gaza are actually refugees from this area. Most travelers, when they go to Jaffa, they either have an Israeli guide or a Palestinian guide. They either hear the Israeli story or the Palestinian story. And so what we wanted to do is bring those two stories together. Do not segregate them. Do not make them one against the other, but have a conversation. Treat people with respect that you can tell them both sides and let them decide for whatever they want to decide. And hopefully our goal is that they don't decide that I'm for this, against that, but rather how can it be part of a solution here? How can I help bring justice and peace into this conversation? As we kept working, we had to get deeper and deeper into our own knowledge, into what responsible tourism is. And this is my favorite definition. It's by a very good friend, Harold Goodwin, who's considered the top expert in the world on responsible travel. He said it's about using tourism to make better places for people to live in and better places to visit in that order. So think about this. When you travel, do you think about how is my travel making the place I'm going to a better place for people who live there? Or is it about how good is it only for me? And that's true in the example I showed you earlier. When you travel and meet two tour guides and work with two tour guides, for example, and get to hear from every side, you are making a difference in the ground. Because you're providing a paradigm that doesn't exist. People working together, it doesn't exist. I told you I go on my business with a Jewish guy. It doesn't normally exist. This is so rare. When I started working with Scott, people were worrying me, how could you partner with a Jewish guy? Or worrying him, how could you work with a Palestinian? Being able to have Palestinians and Israelis work together, being paid exactly the same. And then in other places, like this is a photo from Colombia. This is a guy named Mr. Pumpkin. I like the name too. He has another name, but he said this is the name he wants to be called by. Mr. Pumpkin was one of the top gang leaders in Bogota, Colombia. He told me he killed people. He had 7 people in his family killed in gang activities. And at some point, he was in prison, and he said, this is not the life I want my kids to have. And so he got out of prison, gathered all the guys in his neighborhood, Egipto in Bogota, and said, let's not do violence anymore. I have an idea, let's become all tour guides. And they contacted some tour companies, and some of them helped them build this concept, and he became a tour guide. And I did a tour with him, and when I send tourists to Colombia, I make sure they go to have a tour with him. And I asked him, so do you make now more money being a tour guide or less money? And he said, I make way less money, but I can sleep at night and feel comfortable with it. It's like, stealing phones from tourists, which was his, he said he was known for no tourists going through his neighborhood and leaving with their phone. But now they go and they just pay for the tour, and he's much happier. And tourism transformed not only this person's life, a whole neighborhood. And when I met him, he was telling me their next door neighborhood, which also has another violent group, they also were talking to them about how they can join and do the same thing. This is the power of tourism that we don't even think about. And when we choose to go and do a tour with somebody like Mr. Pumpkin, we actually help change that city. We help change that country. Our money in the helping reform that whole area. Now, when I tell people you should travel responsibly, the first responses I get is, well, first let me tell you that 87% of people say, yes, I want to travel in a responsible way. But then, the same people will start telling you things like, it's not fun to travel responsibly. It's not true. You can responsibly travel and have fun. You can even float in the Dead Sea, only if you're reading National Geographic magazine, otherwise you can sink. You can enjoy your time. Responsible travel is not about, oh, it's going to be miserable and I'm not going to have fun. And I get so many people who tell me that. You can go to the World Cup, which I've done, and get amazing photos and meet incredible people. 32% say they can't find enough information on how to make their travel. And that's actually really important. How do I travel responsibly? The whole reason I wrote my book, Crossing Boundaries, is to answer that question. Because people might want to travel responsibly but not know how. Where do I find the information? What is it that I could or couldn't do, should or shouldn't do when I travel? 42% of people who were asked say responsible travel is too expensive. It's only for high-end, or 20% say it's too cheap. So it's either going to have to be this or that. And that's also inaccurate. It's not about how expensive the trip. It's not what you're paying for the hotel. It's about which way we behave when we're traveling. What are the activities we're doing? What's our encounter with locals? What we're doing with this responsibility of being in these places. So travel is important for us maybe to reimagine it and think of ourselves when we travel, just like with meeting with Mr. Pumpkin, as peacemakers. Think of yourself as a diplomat. Think of travel as an act of diplomacy, an act of peacemaking, something you can do beyond just having fun. And one way to do that is to diversify itineraries. Don't go and do just the same thing that everybody else does. Try to do different things. Meet people while you're traveling. Go to the market. This is a market in Colombia. And try different fruits that you've never had and then be like shocked by the taste, as you can see with my face here. Have dinners at people's home. This is in my house, and that's my mom, which I recruited to cook, and now I'm hungry. This is the best meal you can ever have. It's called mahlube, upside down, and you guys should know what I'm talking about. Caroline, I'm sure you've tried it already. And learn about what is this food about. Learn about how people live in their homes. Don't just go to see the sights. Have some dancing, which maybe we'll do later. Give voice to unheard narratives. Don't just hear the main narratives. Everywhere you travel, you're going to be given this amazing narrative of how everything just historically always fit together. There's a line that, like, no disruption in this line. And if you dig a little deeper, you can find there are other stories that usually the tourism industry doesn't want you to hear. Search for those voices. Try to hear them. This is in Egypt. People go to Egypt to see the pyramids, see the Karnak temple, see Abu Simbel, all amazing places. There's more to Egypt than just old Egyptology. I'll tell you, as much as I love history and archaeology, and I really, really do, after 4 or 5 days of one temple after another in Egypt, I get a little like, just don't mention Ramses II anymore. I'm tired of it. And he's cool. I like all that stuff. But you want more. And this is a place called Garbage City Collectors, Manshia and Nasser. These are people, it's mostly Christian neighborhood. The people there all work in recycling, pretty much. And it has 85% recycling rate. Now, if you go to Europe, you know what's the recycling rate? 20, 25%, and yet you go to Egypt and not learn about how incredible this innovation is. And you can go and see some of the factories where people work, visit some of the nonprofits there, get to meet people, hear their stories. It's an incredible place, and it's so different than anything else you would see in Egypt. You get to visit one of the nonprofits, learn about women and how they produce the work they're producing. It'll change your whole perception about Egypt. Now, as I'm saying this, it is also important to not confuse this kind of tourism with poverty tourism. And I'll give you an example. This is an actual poster I saw when I visited New Orleans. And you read it? It says, Katrina Tour, New Orleans, from the comfort of your air-conditioned minibus. That's not the kind of tourism I'm talking about. Oh yeah, let's go and see how people suffer and take photos of them. Please do not confuse the two because they are not the same at all. I'm talking about getting off your bus, not using zoom lenses, meet with people, leave a lot of times even your camera behind. That's not the most important part of that trip. Try to connect to the locals. One of my other favorite quotes comes from Ibn Battuta. He's a Moroccan traveler about 700-800 years ago. You should read his writings if you haven't, because it's an incredible travel log. And he says, travel makes you speechless, but then it turns you into a storyteller. Travel makes you speechless, but then it turns you into a storyteller. This is in Peru. I love photography. I got up so early. I spent hours waiting for this lima. I had to negotiate so this lima would actually pose for this photo, and literally for 5 seconds. I got lucky I was able to get, and she posed only when the sun went up. Like there was sunny moments, but it wouldn't pose when the sun was up. But this is not what I think about when I think of my time over there. I think of a village I visited, and I was just walking around, and this little girl came and took my hands and just took me to her home. Which I was like, her dad's gonna punch me now. But they welcomed me in. I had tea with them. We barely could speak 10 words the same, and I spent like half an hour there. And it was some of the best time I had in Peru. Because I can never forget the hospitality. I can never forget just the innocence that the family was excited to see someone who's not from there, and we tried to communicate. Somehow did. Language isn't really an obstacle. You can communicate even when you don't speak the same language. This is Vietnam, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. And yet, it's not the scenery that I remember. It's not this beautiful fishing that I remember. It's going to this woman's farm. She was 90 years old when I went to visit her farm. And just spending time with her and her husband, who was 92. And I did ask them, by the way, about how come they got to live that long. And they did tell me the secret: beer. That's what he said. So I went back to the market and I got a pack of beer. So beer is the secret, apparently. But this was, to me, the most amazing moment. This woman smiled the whole time. She was so happy to host us. I got to drink some tea with them, talk about the wartime, the Vietnam War, as they call it, the American War. I realized you can't call it the Vietnam War in Vietnam because you're in Vietnam. So they called it the American War. Talked about that. Talked about before the American War and just their lives and how they still at 90 and 92 farming their own farming and making their own food and just being so happy, which was so impactful. This is the stories that stay with you. Allow yourself to be transformed as you go through these trips. Am I still, can time?
You're fine.
This is one of my favorite photos. It's in Vietnam, and these are endangered species. There are only a few thousands. Some men believe they have superpower if you eat this monkey. And I never was a conservationist kind of person. And yet when I went to Vietnam and I met this guy who took me to see these monkeys, and I spent hours looking for them, finally being able to find one and taking photos, it changed my whole perception in conservation, because suddenly I cared, when before I didn't. And I went back to Washington, and I remember calling everyone I knew, my connections in National Geographic, my connections in other conservation organizations, being like, you need to do something about this. It wasn't who I was before. Travel can change you if you allow it to, and can change you for the better. This is in Washington, D.C., where we went to Anacostia, a black neighborhood in Washington, D.C., where most of the people in this trip, actually all of us, none of us had been to that neighborhood before. And because everyone was afraid to go there. And yet went there, we're completely blown away by the hospitality again, by people who showed us around, by the problems in that neighborhood, which we all responsible for because we lived in the same city. Those kind of trips will change you, so be aware. If you want to travel responsibly, it will change who you are and allow yourself to be transformed. This is my dad. He's now 80, I need to count right, 85 years old. And about 3-4 years ago, I had him come to the US to visit me. And my dad had never, he asked me to go to pray on Friday. And I said, okay, I'll set up something for you. And I sent him with a friend who is older and they can get along at the mosque. And I said, just take my dad with you on Friday, and he did. They go, my dad comes back, and I said, how was that prayer? He's like, yeah, it's fine. Did you like the mosque? Oh, we never went to the mosque. What do you mean you never went to the mosque? I thought you went to Friday prayer. He said, yeah, the mosque was full. I said, so what do you do? He said, we went across the street to the synagogue. Okay, this is confusing. Muslims don't pray usually at the synagogue. Like, explain. He goes, well, when the mosque is full, the Muslims in the area, we rent the synagogue across the street. And so we prayed at the synagogue. And he was so moved by it. Now, my dad at that time was 81, 82, and I asked him, have you been to a synagogue before? He said, no, never in my life. So he lived in Jerusalem. You know how many synagogues exist in Jerusalem? Quite a few. Never been to a synagogue, had to travel to the United States, and he was transformed by it. He started calling everyone in my family, say, guess what happened? And I'm like, what? Can you guess where I prayed today? They're like, it's Friday, mosque. And he's like, no, a synagogue. They're like, oh no, did Aziz convert you to Judaism? No, you don't understand. Muslims and Jews here get along. It's not like Jerusalem. And he started telling them about it, and he was so excited about it. And that in itself gave him hope that he could find such a thing. Travel can transform us if we allow it to. And finally, if I have 3 more minutes, I want to tell you how travel transformed me in one of my trips. Travel is about connecting, not collecting. And I mean memories. I've worked on the Syria conflict away from the tourism work for many years. And it's one of those that is very, very dear to my heart. And at some point, I was in a place called Zaatari refugee camp. 150,000 people were in that camp. It was the 4th largest city in Jordan, a refugee camp. You can see its siege, you can't get in or out at that time. Extremely hot. This kid thought he was there all his life because he wasn't there all his life, but that's all he remembers. And I remember seeing him walking towards me from one of the tents in the back, get my camera ready. I'm like, this is a cute boy. And he's smiling as he's getting closer. I'm like, oh, he likes me. This is cool. And he's getting bigger smile as he's getting towards me. And I'm getting my camera ready. And he goes and picks up that thing in his hand. You know what it is? It's a piece of trash. But he was so excited about it. He was so happy about it. Because when you have nothing, even a piece of trash is something. And he was like, it's a toy. And so I thought, this is a story I need to tell. This is what it means to be a refugee. And so I went back and I started telling this story. And then I started thinking, there's something wrong with my story. Because in reality, I did not tell his story. I told mine. I was not connecting with him. I was collecting this story and using it for my own story that I wanted to tell. And we do that while traveling a lot. And so I went back and I convinced back then National Geographic to send some of the best photographers, Amy Thompson, Matt Moyer. These are people you see on the cover of National Geographic magazine. But not to take photos, but rather to teach these kids how to do the photos themselves. And we thought, let them tell the story. And so we spent a few days teaching them to do, we did this camp, brought the cameras with us and brought some of these kids, and we started teaching them how to do these photos. And within a few days, they were amazing photographers. And I'll show you, well, before I show you, what do you think, if you were a refugee, lost everything you have, lost your home, live in a tent, and I give you a camera and I tell you, show me your life. If you have one photo to give to the world, what would it be?
Your family.
Your family?
A friend laughing.
What is that?
A friend laughing.
A friend?
Smiling.
Right?
The tent.
The tent. Yeah, I honestly thought they're going to show me how terrible their lives are. Because I saw how terrible their lives. It was not good. Those tents had nothing. You had no electricity, you had no clean water, you had nothing. And so I thought that's what they're going to show us. But they went more towards your direction. This is one of the photos that they had. The innovation, I was pretty upset at this photo because I'm like, I have a really fancy, good camera, I've been a photographer for a long time, and these kids did a better job than me in like 4 days. Photos of themselves, the innovation that they had. These kids never had a camera before. They've been in war for 3-4 years at this point. And obviously the most important thing in the world, football, or you'll as incorrectly call it soccer. And I'm gonna end with reading you this story. This is Anwar, who is, at that time was 14 years old. And she decided to take, the photos by Amy Thompson, she took one of her photos, but she decided to write a letter with her photo. And I'm gonna read the letter for you. To whom it may concern, is often on all UN refugee cards, it says in the beginning, to whom it may concern. So she starts her letter with, to whom it may concern. These words I read every day on my UNHCR asylum seeker certificate. I am a Syrian child. The only thing I hope in this world is to wake up from this terrible nightmare, to return to my friends, to return to my life, to my home before this war. And if that time goes back, I just want to play with the people who lost their lives. And I'll ask them to leave Syria. I never thought that I would live in a tent, but that's all right. I never thought that I would not listen to my English teacher whom I loved so much in Syria, but that's all right. I never thought that I would not breathe the smells of Syrian fields on summer nights, but that's all right. But to whom it may concern, please stop war and let me go back to my past life. Travelers can bring stories, and this is a story I wanted to share with you that I brought with me from being her guest. What I love about this letter, by the way, if you read the letter, spelling is terrible, and yet the message is powerful. And maybe a big shout out for the English teachers here, because she calls especially English teachers and saying who she loved because they helped her communicate. And that's what travel is about, communicating, being transformed, being changed, meeting someone different, allowing ourselves to hear something that would challenge us, walking into a different world, crossing boundaries. So I hope at least this story would stay with you. And I'm happy to hear if you have any questions. And most importantly, if you've read the book, please review it online.
And if you have a copy, bring it down for a sign.
Yes, if you have a copy, bring
I'm
it.
sure there are questions, yes? Thoughts?
If you don't ask, I keep talking, so you probably want to ask.
Penelope, I think you should introduce yourself.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Always on the spot. Hey, my name is Penelope Shihab. I'm also Palestinian, Jordanian, and Wyoming now. I call Wyoming my home. Very similar story, but my pathway was more science, innovation, higher education, all this kind of like stuff. But I used to throw stones as well. I was born and raised in Palestine in Ramallah, and then I moved to Jordan. So it's just amazing story seeing you, hearing you here in Wyoming, in this part in the U.S. This is unusual. Thank you very much, Caroline, for that. First, I'm very proud of you, like super proud of you.
Thank you.
Second, I love for our students and people and faculty and everybody in Wyoming to just understand what's happening there from Palestinian, but also like very neutral Palestinian who understands very well what's happening without political agenda, we can say. So I don't have a question. This is just an amazing opportunity to have you here, and welcome to Wyoming, and I wish to see you more often coming here
Thank you.
and talking to all of our students. Thank you, Aziz.
Thank you, thank you. I think reality on the ground is very, very hard. I can definitely share that. My whole family is still in Jerusalem. My parents, my brothers, my nephews, nieces, and every time I call them, it is very hard and very depressing and terrifying. I mean, I can talk to my mom and I can hear tear gas being shot outside. So it is very hard. I think what I try to focus on is what do you do with that? And part of what you do is you tell the story, and part of it is try to find more people to come together and say, we're not doomed to this kind of life. This is not, it doesn't have to continue in this cycle, I kill you, you kill me.
Yes.
There is more that we can do, and it might not be, I think we too often think, how can I change the whole world? And don't realize if each of us does something small, that's what changes the world. Unless I can do a big thing to solve every problem on earth, I'm not gonna do it. But that's why nothing happens. And one of the most depressing things to me sometimes in Jerusalem is I go and meet students and I spend a lot of time back home, and so often they'll say, but what can I do? I'm just one person. And I hear it in the States as much, and that's the most dangerous thing is, oh, my voice isn't important. I'm only one person. And that's not true. You're not only one person. That one person can make some difference. Yes?
So, thank you, Aziz, for your presentation. I don't think you left the space for us to ask questions because that area is so powerful, that we cannot ask a question. But I think, my question is, like spending with you this 3 days, I feel like your life teacher, the teacher of you is life, right? Life taught you how to tell the story, how to be so powerful. But who is your teacher, and what people need to know, like us, what kind of strategies should we use to tell our stories? Because we all have stories. We all traveled.
So when you bring me next time, I do workshops on story.
No, you're going with me to Uzbekistan, which is taking people to Uzbekistan. But what are the strategies? So for normal people who wants to share their just little bio, for example,
So I'll tell you normally the introduction I do when I do storytelling workshops. One, we all have stories, and they don't need to be all dramatic, and not everybody had to go through what I went through or what you maybe went through, but everyone got a story. And if you can't tell people what's your story, they make an assumption about your story. And usually, humans are not very generous with our assumptions. So the assumptions are usually negative. It's like, oh, why are you telling me about this? It must be you have some ulterior motives. So it's important we always tell. So I spoke here to multiple classes, and some of you here heard my story now twice or 3 times, and I find it important before I tell you what I do and what maybe I want you to think about, reflect on, maybe change your thoughts about something, that I tell you where I'm coming from. So sharing where you're coming from is the most important. You can do that in 20 seconds and you can do it in 50 minutes. But telling what makes you care about something personally. Not that, oh, I care because it's so important for the world. No, it's usually something connecting with your personal life. You've gone through an experience. That's what I work on. I use a lot public narrative theory and the folk narrative. Public narrative theory is my favorite when I do workshops, which was developed by Marshall Gantz. He was a civil rights activist, and he's now teaches at Harvard. But yeah, I would have chosen somebody else, but it's really good. Yes?
Aziz, I was wondering, something that was relative. I heard you talk about yesterday, 2 days ago, over at Caroline's house, the red and blue tour that you're talking about, putting together in Washington, D.C. I mean, I thought that was, maybe if you could explain, because that's, very, in the U.S., as you know, that we're a very polarized environment, and kind of how you're thinking through that, or how that's going to be.
So we've run those.
Okay.
And I'm running one myself in the spring, so come and join me.
Okay.
It's much harder to do for Americans than taking them to Israel and Palestine, or taking them to Northern Ireland, where we do Catholic and Protestant, or the Balkans, you do Bosnian and Serbian, and so on. Much harder in the US because it's closer to home. So, and it's topics that we all care about. So what we do is we bring a Republican and Democrat that are more centrist, and they know a lot about the issues. We do tours, so we go to like the Lincoln Memorial, and while at the Lincoln Memorial, we start talking about race issues. We start talking about slavery, the legacy of Lincoln. And it's funny because suddenly the Republican usually would be like, oh yeah, we're the ones who ended slavery, and you guys were the ones for it. So it ends up being very interesting. And then we go to the Korean Memorial, Korean War Memorial, or to the Vietnam War Memorial, and start talking about foreign policy and wars, and from both perspectives. Then we go to some neighborhood like Anacostia and talk about the issues there. We talk about faith and politics, and we visit and meet with some church leaders and talk about that with them. We visit sometimes a mosque and talk about Muslims and how they are viewed in the United States and Washington, D.C. for sure. We meet with different organizations. On one trip, for example, we met with Heritage Foundation, which is very conservative. We met with one of their lawyers and talked about their perceptions on different topics. We met with Center for American Progress, which is totally on the other side, on the left side. So we go and meet even on gun issues with what's they're called, the NRA, and their headquarters is right outside DC. So we try to really tackle every issue, but hear from every side. And what I found, at least the people who've been coming to the trips, it's been incredible. Because people who are coming are willing to dialogue so far. They might have strong opinions one way or the other, but they're willing to hear the other side. And at some point, I was on a trip, one of the first trips we ran, I remember going to the guys and being like, you're agreeing way too much. I need you to spice it up. I told people there'll be 2 different narratives, come on. And they're like, let's think together. I'm like, before you think together, show the disagreement. And I think that's true about the rest of America. We think we're so far apart, but we're not. It's just what the media tells us, what politicians tell us, and unfortunately we buy into this lie. It's not really true.
Friday,
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I was just thinking, the quote from Martin Luther said people don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. In a world that is divided by religion, sexual orientation, political affiliation, even race, what's your strategy for understanding people's experiences? Because experiences differ.
Yeah.
You may understand the issue, but the experience is different. What's your strategy for that?
Stories. I think the most thing that can impact people and help people listen to different experiences are not positions. It's not which box you're on, what you believe in politically, right or left. It's your story. That's what gets people to communicate. If I'm meeting you for the first time, you start telling me what you think about politically, and what you think about an abortion, what you think about race. If we disagree, right away I put you in a box and say, I'm not going to listen to anything this guy is saying. But if you start by telling me your story, that's it. You win me over. And I think we don't use enough of storytelling. If we want to succeed in communicating with each other, use more stories, not positions and politics and so on, and try to put people in boxes and figure out what they are, where they are. I often, when I do talks, people want to know where I stand in different things, and I try not to tell them, at least not right away. Because the moment people find which box you are in, are you left or right? Are you pro this or pro that? Are you, if you speak in Israel and Palestine, they're like, are you for one state or two states? Like, yeah, I'm going to answer that later. First, listen to my story. And I would advise, if you want to communicate with someone, that's the way to go, is tell your story. Yes?
Hi, I'm Ariel Zebrak. I'm an English professor, so I love your emphasis on storytelling. And I think, in my limited experience with these kinds of dialogues, it does seem to be true that people are really able to overcome differences when they connect on an individual level. And so I'm just curious about how in your work you think about bridging that gap between when people are able to sort of have a friendly discourse on an individual level or connect as human beings individually, but then go back to their cultural circumstances or the collectives that they associate with. Like, how do you bridge that gap between individual connection and group connection, especially in areas where there are such ingrained and historical conflicts?
Yeah, I think that's a hard one, and that's a one I keep still thinking about, is how do you do it? One, I think, is maintaining relationships. That when you meet someone and you tell them that story, if you maintain a relationship, it does affect them even after they go. So we did a study on our travelers. We had a PhD student who was finishing her dissertation, and we told her she can contact our travelers and see what was the change they've gone through and how sustainable it was. And 83% of the travelers have gone through transformation that was sustained. 83%. She studied other groups that didn't have the same, and not because they didn't do it, but because the way we set up ourselves of the tutor guides, and we're not selling you a propaganda, we're not going to hide anything from you. We ended up getting people from different political views. If we were, this is a Palestinian running a pro-Palestine trip, or this is an Israeli running a pro-Israel trip, you're not going to change your view because you're probably going to that trip because you're ready with that view. So that's part of it. And then we try to continue those relationships. We try to encourage people to continue in those friendships that they built while they were on the tour. So you create a community that you can share those views with, and it doesn't end at one point. Many of our travelers are repeat travelers. I just did a trip to Morocco. 100% of our travelers were either repeat or friends of the repeat travelers. So it creates a community that you're still connected to. I can give you one story. I had a student who traveled with us from a university in the Northeast, and he's very conservative, and came with me to visit with the Syrian refugees. And I remember when there was strong anti-refugee rhetoric in the US, and I remember him getting on Facebook and writing, I know so many people are against refugees, but I want to share my story with refugees when I was in Turkey and I met with Syrian refugees there. And here's what I think. And I was amazed because he's a politician now. That was a decision that could have cost him votes, and he still did it because he was transformed by that experience and kept relationships with the people we went with, so it gave him some support. I hope that answers. But I think there's more to that needs to be checked. I don't think that's enough, and I keep thinking about that. So if you come up with any ideas, please let me
I think we'll
know.
take 2 more questions, and they're both over there. So it's Healing and the gentleman behind her. And then everybody else, we're going to move up to the lobby, the 9th Street lobby on the next floor. And that's where our reception is. So bring your questions up there. But we'll take these 2 questions, and then we'll conclude. Awesome.
Very inspired talk has made me think a lot, yeah. And then I want to give another perspective about the tourism as a peacemaking process. And I give you another example. I think it's a failure because I'm coming from Taiwan, and in the past few years, we actually used this one of the process for peacemaking. And so the peak time, there can be 2 million Chinese tourists go to Taiwan. But the problem of the tourism is highly controlled by the Chinese government. So it's we call it one dragon tourism, including all the travel agency, the hotel, they stay, and even the hotel, they stay, there are only a few TV channels available, and all the tour guides have these narratives coming from China. And so even so many people come to Taiwan, they may come out the conclusion Taiwan is ours. They strongly intensify through this process. Yeah. So my question is about, it should be a good tool, but in this negotiation process, it's somehow very hard to negotiate with China. They are the consumer, and
They're the powerful player.
Yeah. So
You're right.
it's very hard.
But I would say there are always loopholes. Every challenge, there's a solution to it. So I would need to look a little deeper to find some of that potential solution. Because I've worked in areas where I needed to submit my itinerary to the police before I ran the tour in some countries. You need to get everything approved in some countries we work in. And we still found ways around it. Now, the other way around it with Chinese tourists, they don't go only to Taiwan. They also go to Europe. They also go to Vietnam. They also go, and there's maybe a place to get some of this conversation happening in other places, not only in Taiwan. So there are other places to engage that might be not traditional, not that classic. It'll take some time. I think tourism from China is still, like you say, too much agency driven, and it's going to take a little bit of time. It will happen though, and you'll see people will get tired of that, and eventually they'll want to branch out and do other things on their tours. It might take a few years, but I have no doubt that'll happen, because I've seen transformation of American tourism. I've seen transformation of certain European markets, where in the beginning was, I want to go and see stuff, and slowly became, okay, we've seen stuff, now we want something more. Okay. Yes?
What is your approach or advice to communicating with people when language is an obstacle?
Few things. One, sometimes while language is an obstacle, there are now some apps. I know on the last few trips I've used, people use those apps and it actually worked. They'll speak into the phone and the phone will translate and vice versa, which is incredible. I haven't myself used them, but my travelers have, and they say it has worked incredibly well. Two is if you're working with a local tour guide or someone, they can translate for you, and we use that quite often. I don't want all the speakers who come and meet my travelers to be, very well educated and speak perfect English. I want them to meet everyone and not just based on your English. And so we have our tour guides translate, so you can have local tour guides. I work in areas where it's too expensive maybe to hire a tour guide, so I do experiences in Egypt, for example, where I bring students who come and translate between travelers and locals, and so it doesn't cost as much, but I provide experience for the students who are learning English in most cases and trying to get experience in translating. It still pays them a little bit. There are so many ways to do that. In some countries, a few countries actually I found where every once or twice a week You can go to there's a park where you can go and students are sent by their teachers on assignment to learn English from you, and they ask you questions and you answer, and it's brilliant. Vietnam, for example, Hanoi has it, Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon has it. I think Thailand also has some of that stuff. I've seen it a lot. Yeah, Indonesia has it. I've seen it a lot in especially Asian countries. And it's brilliant because it's doing it on the terms of the locals, not the tourists. I don't encourage usually travelers to go to schools. I think it's not a good idea. But if they coming to you and they telling you what they want, I think it's perfect.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. If people are coming to us and telling us what they want, we should really listen. Aziz, we are tremendously grateful to you for coming.
Thank you.
First of all,
Thank
that's
you.
big. The requisite bag of swag, and we know that you travel light, so this wraps around your luggage handle. There's an advantage to being brown and gold, at least the gold part when you're traveling. See, you'll never lose anything ever again, and various other things in here for you for travel. But this one we're particularly proud to give you, and hope that you will carry it as you go,
Thank you.
and it will remember UW as you travel.
Awesome.
So
And my photos in it.
that-